Welcome to this edition of Big Ideas in Supply Chain. My name is Ann Robinson, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Kinaxis. I'm joined today by my co-host, Angel Mendez, Kinaxis board member and a leader in supply chain transformation. Today, we're going to be talking about innovation in supply chains and some of the ways that you can learn, tackle, figure out how to increase the adoption within your organizations. I'm joined today by two guests, Professor Mohan Sodhi from the Bayes Business School at the City University of London. I'm also joined by Professor Jay Swaminathan from the Kenan-Flagler Business School at University of North Carolina. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. So let's start off by talking a little bit about supply chain innovation and what are we actually talking about? What does it mean from your vantage points and particularly from maybe your students' vantage points? So Mohan, let's start with you. You and I have had conversations about this in the past and I think you have some great insights.
From a student's point of view, what they see is how new products are coming in. I'll give you the example of electric vehicle. Tesla obviously has been an innovator in the product, but also in the supply chain with the gigacasting and all that. So that's something innovative because innovation in the supply chain, compressing the assembly line into 200 operations into a single operation, bringing suppliers much closer as opposed to the globalized supply chain back into a localized supply chain. So that is very exciting for students. And if you think about Toyota has always been a sort of a leader in the auto industry. And if you think about their innovation, the supply chain in a way has kept constant and the changes to the product have been incremental. It was the Toyota Prius, then it became a hybrid, then it became a hybrid with a battery, a plug-in kind, and now it's Toyota hybrid plug-in with a solar roof. So these are incremental changes which don't require massive changes in the supply chain. From an innovation point of view, you have to decide when do you make the small changes and when do you make the big changes. The important thing to remember is when the product changes, the supply chain has to change too.
And Jay, what about from your perspective?
So I teach a class on innovation and technology and how it's innovating supply chains, and we deal with a number of different things that are happening. This is a fascinating period in terms of innovation. So we talk, there's additive manufacturing, which is picking up big time from a manufacturing standpoint. What does it mean for supply chain? Now you can actually start everything in a virtual format, and then you can sell and then you produce. So it's a very, very different system we are moving towards in some parts of the industry. We'll also talk about data, the power of data analytics, and the notion of visibility, concurrency in decision making. And you all have been in the classroom talking about what Kinaxis does and some of the other companies that are in this sphere. That's a tremendous form of innovation because now this is enabling firms to really optimize their supply chains and get to the next level. Then we also talk about innovations. We see innovations in how the data is captured, right? So right now, a lot of our data is captured through ERP systems or enterprise systems, but now you have a new generation of data coming from IoTs, right? So how do you actually leverage all of that together using the cloud architecture? This is another form of innovation. You're seeing a lot of companies actually utilize that to improve their supply chain. And finally, more names that I would call newer technologies such as blockchains, as well as using artificial intelligence within the context of supply chain. This is another form of innovation that we're seeing happening in the industry.
John Sicard, who is the CEO of Kinaxis, as you guys know, likes to say that there's a renaissance in the supply chain space when it comes to innovation. And when we debated, I always remind John that we are too COVID focused when we think of this renaissance. A lot of people in the general zeitgeist, of course, see all of what's happened to supply chains and since. I track it back to at least 10 years before that, where a tremendous amount of funding pursued inefficiencies in supply chain, the cloud making a huge difference to implementation speed and to data movement and so on. In your minds, as you look at your research work and your companies you engage with, where are the hotspots today? What do you see as the biggest opportunities today, knowing what we've learned from COVID, but also seeing the curve, if you will, of all this innovation?
I mean, that question can be answered at different levels in terms of how much change is required. So if you keep supply chain constant, then it's a question of making it more effective and efficient. Some of the things Jay talked about, use of technologies to capture data and then analyze it, use AI, all those things. So essentially, it's the same processes, but they're now working faster because, as we say in supply chain, you have material flow, information flow, cash flow. Cash flow is still messed up, but information flow, where the latency should really be 0 seconds. Right? Currently, it's not. So by making it 0 seconds, you're making the supply chain decision-making much faster. So that's one innovation. But another thing we see is companies saying, is the product going to reach the customer in a totally different way? So whether it's talking about music coming from tapes and then CDs, and then little devices, and now it's just coming through the air with streaming. So the supply chain is obviously quite different, and maybe you don't need the supply chain. Maybe people just take a little tablet and hear music anyway.
It's a different one. I mean, it's a different totally way of value delivery, right?
So consumer habits changing is also forcing companies to do things differently. And then the whole e-commerce thing is still around. I mean, COVID proved how effective e-commerce companies could be compared to a brick and mortar store. So that part has also changed companies quite a bit. They need to have these hybrid operations in store. So no matter which company it is, they are thinking of, or if they are not already doing online deliveries. So that's innovation on how we deliver to the customer and what we deliver to the customer. So those are the big questions.
How about you?
I would say that, the way, the supply chain is evolving, right? The fundamental questions around supply chain is evolving. You think about, there are few big trends. One is digitization and servicization. So digitization, everybody understands, but also there's a lot of thinking around every product being a service. So the music industry is one example. But also when you think about even the cab ride or, the marketplaces, everything is becoming where asset light, right? So this is a big change in terms of how the action there is a lot about supply chain concepts, because you're trying to bring resources in real time to make demand meet supply, right? So this is basically what we are trying to do in those industries. So that's one of the pieces of action, I would say, where students are very interested in understanding, can I create a different model which is asset light that can, kind of break through and create a breakthrough in an industry setting. I think the second area where I think we're seeing a lot of excitement is around, in terms of action, companies thinking about it is basically cloud. How do you optimize using the cloud? And control towers within the context of supply chain, which is providing that information and using that to optimize. And now, of course, artificial intelligence. I think this is where tremendous interest is, at least in the student population.
So we should talk about those students.
If I could add to that.
Yes, please.
I had mentioned those material flow, information flow, cash flow. At least in London, there is also the excitement around the financial flows. I mean, London is a finance city. And what do we do with supply chain finance, reverse factoring? There is quite a lot of interest, despite recent and massive failures in reverse factoring. So financial flows are still quite primitive for the most part, and improving those is quite exciting.
So if you're an operator, if you're a chief supply chain officer today, let's say, no matter where you are in the world, you're very focused on getting the day-to-day execution right. How would you advise they keep up with this wave of innovation, these technology-driven, process-driven, skills-driven. What have you seen work for those who are in our audience who may be wondering, how do I keep up? How do I organize it for my company, and how do I make it come to life?
How do I learn?
How do I learn?
I think so far, because COVID was such a tumultuous period, a lot of learning came from reacting.
Right.
Because if you go further back, there are lessons lost too. There were pandemics before. This is not the first pandemic.
Right,
we had the 2009, 2010, and then 2002, 2003 with SARS-1. It seems those lessons are then quickly forgotten. So people learn how to react, do good things, and then they go back into a zone of comfort until the next big thing hits. In a way, it's a problem in the companies because supply chain is supposed to deliver on cost and nothing else. And it was only during COVID saying, okay, forget the cost, at least gather some revenue by delivering the product. And that creates some innovation. How long it'll stay, I don't know. And because COVID will disappear, hopefully. And that means things will eventually normalize. I hope eventually normalize with skills shortage and everything. In terms of what they should do, they know that this digital front is there anyway. And I remember being in Silicon Valley back when e-commerce was new. And so everybody was scared that they might get Amazoned away, which they were, but incidentally, many of them. And I think that might be the only thing to remember, that you can be wiped out. And the massive difference that I see between companies on that digital front, some are so sophisticated that as an academic, I can only have my mouth open saying, oh my God, what are companies doing? And most companies are just thinking about something. And you can keep thinking about things. In the meantime, the world moves on.
Right.
So I think they have to at least start experimenting with these digital technologies. They have to start experimenting not just with the supply chain, but what part of the product could be digitalized away. It could be the whole product that's digitalized away, or like with an electric vehicle, some components are now software and chips only, which otherwise would have been camshafts and all kinds of mechanical gears, moving parts. They've all disappeared. So your product may disappear, your customer may disappear, and your supply chain may disappear. So there has to be some notion of that in the background to keep some innovation going.
Yeah, I think what you're articulating is by being customer-centric in your thought process and recognizing what it is that the customer needs, that supply chain, whether it shifts from being a physical supply chain to digital in the case of music, or if it just fundamentally changes because now you're getting a ship from store that's going right to your neighborhood bodega as opposed to a big international shipment for a product, whatever those evolutions are, that always needs to be in the back of your mind, right? Not necessarily looking from a raw material forward supply chain, but customer back, which honestly, Angel, is something that you really brought to the forefront back in the Cisco days.
It was a very tactical environment every day, and one of the things I cared an awful lot about was to bring people out of that environment and get them to elevate their thinking and see the world, at least for a week, a year. What are the big trends? What are the big things we need to think about? When I worked together during that period of time, and what do you see now? This was 10 years ago, perhaps more. What do you see now?
So I think that's a very good point. I think one of the most important things when you're leading a supply chain organization is to understand what is out there. And sometimes in your day-to-day, you're so busy that you don't have the opportunity to just explore and know all the new technologies. So universities, definitely that's a first starting point. You've got great universities doing research and knowing about these new technologies, case studies around that, and then taking the organization for a week or maybe 10 days and just getting infused with all those new ideas that could really open up your thinking. That's the first step, I would say. And you and your organization did amazingly well with the Cisco program that you had for multiple years,
Yeah.
which totally kind of changed the way Cisco at that time thought about supply chain, became more customer focused. In today's context, I think there are some other avenues as well. So executive education, bringing students, of course, bringing executives to campus is one, but there's also a lot of material on the internet, either through Coursera or through universities themselves offering this material in the form of education, in the form of small classes that people can take online and get to know the technology. But getting to know is just the first part. The second part for actually innovating is to have a business case or a pilot which will fit, which will serve a purpose. Because the whole idea is how do you actually enhance the value provided in your business with that innovation. Sometimes we see the case where you hear a buzzword, you hear blockchain or you hear AI and you say, I need to implement this, but you're not thinking so much about what does it actually bring to me? What is it? How can I deliver superior
What's the
value?
problem I'm trying to solve? Yes.
And so I think that's important, right? So among the companies that you see innovate better or faster, I would say, is having that drive to actually solve a problem for the customer or enhancing the value, and then using the technology and a pilot along with that to try that, right? And then the third one is, of course, if you want to be successful at innovation, you got to try lots of things, right? So what we see with companies that have been successful is to, they try many things. 75%, 80% of them are going to fail.
Yep.
But you should not lose heart with that.
I've always used the expression, you have to take more shots on
That's
goal.
right, exactly.
Because you never know. What are the
couple of very simple techniques in a way, making what Jay said tangible. What I do with my executive MBA students is two things. One is scenario planning. So they at least get used to the idea of dealing with a completely uncertain future. What should your company be doing, products, etc. So scenario planning. And the second one is design thinking, saying how would you redesign a process? So design thinking. So these are both kind of open-ended and brainstorming type of activities. And it could be done in a day, half a day. And at least people will keep in mind that big changes are afoot.
Indeed.
And it'll become a seed for future innovation.
So I'm hearing be curious, learn, test and try, and then fail fast.
And organize all of that into a routine, a process, a repeatable management process. I am super curious, and we can't let two educators sit with us for a little bit of time and not talk about their students.
That's right.
And whether they are graduate students or executive MBA students or undergraduate students, I'm curious about two things. One, how are their interests different today than 10 years ago when it comes to supply chain education? When they come to your programs, why do they come now versus when they come then? Is it different? What are the material changes? And the second thing I'm interested in is what skill sets do you think now you have to help them with, impart in them, that are different than, say, 5 or 10 years ago? So if you could take that and just riff around it, I'd be curious.
For our master's degree, the students who are coming in now are definitely curious about digital technologies. I mean, that's the big draw. How can we use AI, blockchain? And initially, it seems their interest is really around the jargon rather than the technologies per se. They want to be able to say those things and then come up with a startup model which will be quickly become in the billions of dollars. Jokes aside, the interest, I would say the draw right now is the use of the newfangled digital technologies for the master's students. The executive MBA students are older, they're just trying to survive, seriously. I mean, it's how to continue keeping the ship floating and keeping it going in some direction. So there is a very different approach, different attitude.
What about for you, Jay? What are you saying?
So I would say in terms of the shift in the last maybe 15 years to now, 15 years ago, students would be more interested in the global aspect of the supply chain. Their whole goal was, okay, we are in a global economy. How do I create a supply chain so that I can learn all the tricks around where I could leverage different resources and try to build the supply chain, the most efficient and effective supply chain. Today, I think the shift is more towards digitization, understanding all these digital resources I've got. How do I actually utilize that to make my supply chain more productive and more, responsive? That would be one big difference, I would say. The second big difference, and this is more maybe because of the COVID and all the post-COVID impact, at least in our school, we're seeing a major interest from the larger pool of students that are going through the MBA program, right? Everybody wants to know, what is this thing called supply chain? And so I have in my class almost 50% of the MBA class takes the supply chain elective now.
Wow.
And not all of them are going to be in supply chain. The reason they take supply chain is because they think that this is like finance today. And so they want to know what supply chain is before they graduate from the MBA program. So this is a big shift from 10 years ago, where I think most of the students who took my class would be people who wanted to be in logistics, who want to be in supply chain operations. But now a good proportion of students are going into finance industry, are going to be majoring in marketing, but they want to take the supply chain class. I think those would be the two big differences.
That's great. So it sounds like supply chain is a good place to be these days.
Yeah.
So we are actually at time. That was a quick conversation, but was certainly appreciated. If any of our listeners would like to reach out and know more about their programs, can they reach out to both of you
sure.
or even get involved from an industry engagement perspective?
Sure.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone who joined us today for this edition of Big Ideas in Supply Chain. And thank you to all my guests. This was a great conversation.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.